It began in silence. A crude wooden floor creaked under the boots of a trembling midwife as she stepped into the Walsh estate's west wing. The candles burned low, their flames flickering against the walls like ghosts trying to speak. The girl in the bed, barely 16, was soaked in sweat, clutching the sheets, her eyes wide with terror more than pain. A scream built in her chest, but never left her mouth. There was no one to scream to. Only the Walsh men stood in the shadows, ink-stained fingers folded neatly behind their backs, watching like academics, not fathers or brothers or uncles. That was the last birth ever recorded in the West Wing. Dr. Elias Walsh, the patriarch, stood at the head of the Walsh medical dynasty. By the year 1798, the Walsh family had grown into a legend across Maryland, known for their pioneering techniques in childbirth and surgery. Their estate, with its spires and brick wings, wasn't just a home. It was a hospital, laboratory, and mausoleum stitched into one. Inside, science was God, and pain was simply a variable to be measured. But within that towering household, the youngest son, Elias Walsh, stood apart. He was a quiet boy, barely 20, drawn more to sketchbooks than scalpels. While his brothers documented surgical trials and recorded patient screams as vocal indicators of vitality, Elias wandered through the woods sketching birds with broken wings and orphan deer tangled in fences. He had the Walsh hands, steady, long, unshaking, but he hadn't yet touched a body. He painted them instead. Elias rarely spoke, but his silence wasn't cruel like his brother's. It was gentle, like someone hiding something too soft for the world they'd been born into. Every morning, he washed the blood from the copper sinks and avoided eye contact with the patients brought into the rear gate. Most never left. The estate had no official records of those who didn't survive. That was by design. What was missing in Elias's life wasn't ambition or love. It was permission. Permission to feel horror. Permission to say this is wrong. But he had grown up in a house where morality was a theory, not a truth. And that morning, as the midwife left with red-stained hands and deadened eyes, Elias followed her to the gate and found a small, cold bundle wrapped in linen. A baby, silent, unmoving. That was the first child he buried, and it would not be the last. There were always rumors about the Walsh estate. Villagers whispered strange cries at night, of patients seen shackled to bedposts, of wagons leaving under tarp at dawn. But no one dared challenge a family whose name was etched into the town's medical foundation. Not until Margaret Albury went missing. She had gone in with stomach pains and never returned. Elias remembered her, not for her beauty, but for her kindness. She once brought him honeycomb and said, "This is how sweetness survives winter." That memory stayed with him, quiet and unwelcome, as his brothers referred to her body in their journals as Specimen 9. In the attic, Elias found her hair ribbon, still stained, tucked in the drawer of an unused desk. It wasn't the evidence that broke him. It was a familiarity. Like all of this had been done before. Many times. Haunted, Elias began sneaking into the operating records late at night, poring over diagrams that shouldn't exist, live uterine dissections, infant anatomical sketches, handwritten notes describing pain thresholds. He started sketching again, but this time not birds, faces. The faces of women whose names never made it past the gate. Names he would never know, but could not forget. One evening, beneath loose floorboards in the East Library, he found a locked box. Inside, letters. Testimonies from nurses long dismissed. Accounts of procedures done without consent. Experiments on enslaved women. Each page inked with dates, names, and margins redacted in thick charcoal. Among the papers was a letter from a woman named Clara. Her words were shaky but deliberate. They called it procedure. I called it murder. My daughter bled out while they argued over whether the womb could be preserved. Elias read it twice, then a third time. Then he burned it, not out of denial, but fear. He knew what his family did to loose ends. But what Elias didn't know, what he couldn't yet face, was that the child he had buried was Clara's granddaughter. And someone had noticed he'd started asking questions. The winter of 1799 arrived like a funeral march, cold, silent, and merciless. Elias stopped sleeping. He walked the halls with oil lanterns and imagined the women buried beneath the garden hedges. He stopped sketching altogether. There was nothing left to draw but guilt. Then one night, he entered the West Wing. No one had used it in months. Dust blanketed the cots. Surgical tools lay rusted beside dried linens. But the table in the farthest room was clean, too clean, recently used. There, under a white cloth, lay a woman, young, pale, her wrist still tied to the table leg. Her body was cold, but her expression wasn't frozen in death. It was stunned, almost betrayed. Pinned beside her was a note. Failure. Uterine rupture post-twin extraction. Elias fell to his knees. He knew her. Her name was Evangeline. She'd been a midwife's assistant. She smiled with her whole face. She liked tea. This time, he didn't cry. He unbound her hands, cleaned her body, and carried her into the woods alone, dug with his own bare hands. And something broke. That night, Elias confronted his father. Dr. Elias Walsh stood in the observatory with surgical gloves, still damp, and didn't flinch. "You are not one of us," the old man said. But Elias didn't reply. He handed his father a sketch, a drawing of Evangeline, alive, smiling. It was his final piece. Then he left. The next morning, the entire East Wing caught fire. No one could prove Elias had done it. No one tried. The Walshes rebuilt. But the journals, the records, the letters, they were all gone. Or so they thought. Elias vanished from the public eye. Some said he'd gone north. Others whispered he died. But 40 years later, in 1839, a bound manuscript was delivered anonymously to a small abolitionist print shop in Boston. It was titled The Silent Garden, Testimonies of the Walsh Experiments. Inside were sketches, names, letters, timelines, medical records once thought lost. The book detailed over 60 women subjected to experimental surgeries under the Walsh name. It exposed a dynasty of brutality masquerading as medicine. The manuscript ignited an inquiry that would tarnish the Walsh reputation forever. They were never charged, laws at the time protected them, but their legacy decayed. Donations ceased, buildings were renamed, and history, as it always does, found its truth too late. But buried deep within that manuscript, on the final page, was a sketch. A man kneeling in the snow, burying a woman beneath a twisted cedar tree. No words, just a line beneath the drawing. Where science forgets humanity, history must remember. The story of Elias Walsh is not one of heroism, but of reckoning. He didn't stop the crimes, but he told the truth. And sometimes, telling the truth is the most dangerous surgery of all. 1798, Maryland. The Sinister Walsh Dynasty, America's most horrific medical scandal. A story not just of science and silence, but of conscience buried and unearthed.